Welcome to the 15th Annual Ohio Education Technology Conference. My name is John Conley. I am the Assistant Deputy Chancellor for the Ohio Board of Regents for Educational Technology. And I serve as the Chancellor Designee, the Chair for the E-Tech Commission. And I'll tell you what, I've seen this conference for the last 2 years, and the staff does an amazing job. It's a year-round event planning this. And I want to give them a quick shout out and a quick round of applause as well. Thank you all to the staff. You know, this is an exciting time for us in education because of what's happening with technology around us. We're having a hard time almost keeping up with it. It's moving so fast. You know, there's one of the 3 pillars that we picked for this conference was, empowering, engaging, and equipping our schools, our teachers, and our administrators, because our students are they demand it so much. It's in their everyday lives. So I ask each and every one of you really to I challenge you to get as much out of this conference as you can. We have brought in some of the best talent, the best thinkers in the country and around our state for this conference. And I really hope that you get as much out of it as we hope you do. To highlight a couple things, like I said about our speakers that are speaking today and the next 2 days, we have Heather Staker, Max Brooks, Andrew Ng, Sebastian Thrun. These are some of the most forward thinkers in education today in our country, and we are very excited to have them here with us. Later today, we will launch our iLearn Ohio platform, which in conjunction with the Ohio Department of Education, the Ohio Board of Regents, is our new online distance learning platform. And we will be doing that at 1:15 in the Pavilion Hall D. And I encourage all of you to come look at this new tool. And that's exactly what it is a tool that the state is providing to education. In Hall C, as some of you have maybe seen already today, is the MASH Lab, which is, for the first time ever, is our social media command center that I encourage all of you to go over and see what they're doing. It's truly incredible to see what's going on over there. I'm delighted to be here today just because there's so many educational leaders. It's amazing to be in front of so many teachers. I know you're going to grade me later, so I hope I do well. But I encourage all of you to really participate in this conference over the next 3 days. I will be here every day throughout the day. And I hope to talk to as many of you as I can and get your ideas of what's happening in the state of Ohio, because it is so important for us. I have 4 children. I am a stakeholder. I am invested in Ohio. And what you do every day, I thank you. My kids are excited to go to school in the morning, and it makes me happy. When I put my twin boys on the bus this morning and watched that big, bright yellow bus pull down the street, to see the smiles on their faces, they're excited to go to school. And I don't ever want to see them lose that thirst for knowledge. So thank all of you. I appreciate everything you do, and I know everyone in Ohio does. So without further delay, I want to introduce Terry Frederica. She is the Executive Director of Info Ohio. She is one of our partners in K-12, and she is going to introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you very much, and enjoy today.
Thanks, John. Good morning. Our goal at Info Ohio is to support teaching and learning by ensuring equal access to digital resources for all educators, students, and their families. We strive to put these resources in a context that meet the needs of education today. Our work at the intersection of education and technology gives all those supporting Info Ohio across the state a great appreciation for the power and impact of blended learning in our schools and communities. And that is why it's my great pleasure to introduce Heather Clayton Staker as this morning's keynote speaker for the topic of blended learning. Ms. Staker is a Senior Research Fellow for the Education Practice at Insight Institute, a nonprofit think tank devoted to applying the theories of disruptive innovation to problems in the social sector. Her credentials and experience are matchless. She is a magna cum laude graduate from Harvard College with an MBA from Harvard Business School, a frequent keynote speaker and panelist at education innovation conferences throughout the country, and testifies regularly before state decision makers, including those in Ohio. Her report, The Rise of K-12 Blended Learning, was named one of the 11 most valuable reports for policymakers and practitioners in 2011. It greatly informed the development of InfoHio's own blended learning high school course being debuted at the conference, Research for Success. And finally, she was named by Scholastic as one of the 5 people to watch in education for 2012. But perhaps most importantly, Ms. Staker is a mom of 5 and is committed to finding ways to get all children, all students, genuinely enthralled with learning. That is a passion we share, and this is why I am so excited to introduce her to you today. Please help me welcome Heather Clayton Staker. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here today. I brought with me a puzzle, and this is, could Harvard Business School ever fail? When I started Harvard as a freshman, one of the first legends that is, let me make sure this is going forward. One of the first legends that they tell you is that there are 3 rules at Widener Library. Widener Library is the great big library in the middle of Harvard Yard. And the legend is that there are 3 rules about that library. When Mrs. Widener endowed Harvard Library, the Widener Library, she said, if you ever move 1 brick of that building, it will revert to the property of Cambridge and no longer belong to Harvard anymore. She also said that they had to serve ice cream at every meal, and she also said that they had to teach swimming to all the incoming freshmen because her son had died in the Titanic. And so she wanted to make sure that the other freshmen didn't face a similar fate. And so she said that in order for that property to remain Harvard's, that they would have to teach swimming to all of the incoming freshmen. And those were the 3 rules for Widener Library. When you think about Harvard, it feels like one of those almost impossibly permanent institutions, the kind of place that will be around forever and ever. And yet when you look across the sweep of history, what we find is that organizations and businesses that are starting at the top of their pack often find themselves middle of the heap, and then a decade later, bottom of the pack. And ironically, it's oftentimes the very principles of good management that they teach at Harvard Business School that lead to every organization's ultimate demise. Today, I want to look across the past at some of the patterns that we've developed in our research that can show us a little bit about where we are now and where we're going in the future. And by studying those, I'm hoping that we might be able to peek into the future together and predict and anticipate where education is heading in the years ahead. So beginning with the past, many people in this room are probably familiar with Digital Equipment Corporation. They were one of the most widely admired companies in the 70s and 80s. And then right around 1988, Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, just fell off the cliff. They had been one of the biggest companies in America. They employed more people in the state of Massachusetts than any other company except for the state of Massachusetts itself. So it was curious that in the late 80s, they just fell off a cliff. And so often when you read accounts about why DEC failed, it was attributed to the ineptitude of the management team. People said that those managers just fell apart. When you read accounts about why they were so successful before, it was attributed to the brilliance of the management team. But it was the very same people running the company. So the stupid manager hypothesis didn't really make sense. And as a matter of fact, all the other mini computer makers at the same time fell apart. Data General, Wang, Prime, Hewlett-Packard, Digital Equipment, they all fell apart at the same time. So that stupid manager hypothesis didn't seem right. And it was in making that observation that Professor Clayton Christensen of Harvard Business School arrived upon the theory of disruptive innovation. So let me give you a feel for how the theory of disruptive innovation works, and then we'll use that theory to observe what's happening in education right now. The first element of the theory is that in every market there is a trajectory of performance improvement that customers can utilize or absorb. At the high end, there are people, like maybe some of your bosses, who are very unsatisfied no matter how much you give them. At the low end, there are people who have pretty simple needs and who are happy with basic performance. So it's a range. The second element of the theory of disruptive innovation is that in every market, there's a trajectory of performance improvement that companies introduce as they introduce better and new products to serve their customers. And at some point, that trajectory of technological improvement intersects with and bypasses the ability of customers to utilize or absorb those technological improvements. I remember in the 1980s as I was learning word processing, and I would have to wait as that 286 chip caught up with my fingers because that dang cursor was slow. Do you remember? And then it got better and better, and Intel improved, and by the time they came out with that 3 gigahertz Pentium 4, it had way shot beyond my needs as a consumer for most mainstream business applications. That's an example of a sustaining innovation. And in sustaining battles, the incumbent nearly always wins. The companies that were at the top before a sustaining battle end up at the top at the end of a sustaining battle. So then along comes a disruptive innovation. And it's disruptive because it brings to market a product or solution that is so much more affordable and simple that it allows people who before had no access to the market to now take part. Let me give you another way of thinking about a disruptive innovation. Most of us live our lives around the outer rim of these concentric circles, where it takes very little expertise and experience to participate in the market. In the center is where only those with the most wealth and expertise can participate. So consider the early days of computing. Before computers came around, most of us lived our lives with slide rules. They were widely distributed, available to everyone for low cost, pretty simple to use. When the mainframe computer was invented, it snapped the industry to the center, where only those with the most wealth and expertise could access a mainframe computer. These were huge machines. They would have filled up a third of this auditorium. They cost $2 million. And if you had a data set that you needed to be run, you would take them to these teams of sophisticated engineers to run your problem set for you. It was too complicated for the average person. But then along comes the disruption. First, the mini computer. These still weighed 1,500 pounds and were the size of a file cabinet, but they were $200,000 as opposed to $2 million. And so they allowed a much broader group of people to participate in computing. And then the personal computer, the laptop computer, and finally, the mobile devices that so many of us are carrying around at this very moment. One interesting note about disruptions is that typically they begin not as good as their predecessors. So consider the laptop. When Apple came out with the laptop, they took this crummy device that couldn't really do very much relative to a mainframe computer or a mini computer, and they said, who would want this thing? And they realized that really their only chance was to sell it to children, for whom it would be a great toy, and to hobbyists. And so that's how the personal computer got its start. It got better and better through sustaining innovation until now, how many of us work with computers on a daily basis in our own homes and work environments? That's the process of disruption. We can see disruption taking place really clearly at the higher education level, where it used to be that full-time universities, fully integrated state and private universities, educated most of the adults who sought higher education. Today, 50% of adults are educated in community colleges, and online learning is growing at a rate of 15 to 20% per year. So we see that process of disruptive innovation bringing higher education to more and more adults in a more convenient, accessible, and less expensive way. And that is typical of a disruptive innovation. The process of disruptive innovation is not particular to a certain sector. It pervades for-profit, nonprofit, and government institutions. I love the example of disruption in the automobile industry, where you used to see GM and Ford just owning the compact and subcompact markets. And every now and then, they would notice Toyota on the horizon and say, man, I'm worried about that Corona. Do we need to worry about that Corona? It's sort of low end. We're not really worried about it compared to a Cadillac Escalade, but maybe. And so every now and then, they'd throw down a Chevette or a Pinto, but it was sort of half-hearted, because really what they were worried about was their customers who wanted that Cadillac Escalade. Meanwhile, the Toyota improved and improved until now Toyota owns the compact and the subcompact market. But not for long, because we can see very clearly the Koreans coming into the market with the Hyundai and the Kia. And then on the horizon beyond that, we see the Chinese with the Chery and the Indians with the Tata. So that process of disruption continually transforms the sector. Anyone who noticed the news recently about the US Postal Service discontinuing Saturday delivery have email to thank. So one more theory to throw at you before we hopefully bring this to something relevant for why you're here today, and that is the theory of hybrids. I'm going to let you in on some of our research that we're working on right now, so if this part seems a little bit rough, please forgive me. We're just starting to write about this right now, but I want to expose you to it because it's some of the work that I'm really thinking about and excited about. And I'm going to borrow from a different sector, a really different sector, and that's the industry of mass excavators. In the early days, in the early 1900s, these were steam shovels, and then as diesel engines were invented, they became powered by gasoline. But regardless, the early excavators used a system of cables to dig big mounds of dirt. And their customers were miners and general contractors who had to do a big job. And the way that these early excavators were valued was according to how far they could reach and how big their scoops were. The best excavators of the day had 5 cubic meters of scoop, so they could bring a lot of dirt up at once. Well, then right after World War II, hydraulics were invented. And hydraulics, at first, didn't have very broad reach and had small scoop, like 1/4 of a cubic meter. So the question was, who would want one of these dang things? They were so inferior to one of the big cable-actuated excavators. And the creative entrepreneurs decided that farmers might be attracted to a hydraulically powered excavator for the very reasons that it was inferior for the miners and general contractors. It had narrow reach. It was small. You could hook it up to the back of your trailer. And so you could bring it into your backyard and dig a small irrigation ditch relatively easily. So the very defects that made the hydraulically actuated excavator inferior for the mainstream market were the values that were appropriate and relished by the farmers and the small residential contractors who needed a highly maneuverable machine. Well, that's not the end of the story, because some of the sustaining innovators on that back plane of competition who had thrived for decades with their cable-actuated excavators, they saw the hydraulic system on the horizon, and they thought, well, we better pay attention to that. That could be important down the road. And so they thought, we better bring some sort of hydraulics into our system. But they were continuing to serve the miners and the general contractors who they didn't want to ignore. So they said, let's introduce a hybrid. So Bucyrus Erie, here's some other hydraulics. Bucyrus Erie came forth with this machine that was literally called the Hydro Hoe. And the Hydro Hoe was a hybrid system. It had both the cable-actuated cables plus the hydraulics. And so the pitch was that it would be capable of continuing to serve the miners and the general contractors, but it had this really nifty new hydraulic system on it. As you can imagine, over time, the pure play hydraulic system got better and better, such that it enticed all of those traditional miners and mainstream contractors into the new plane of competition and just decimated the cable-actuated industry. and the hydro like its peers fell by the wayside. So that's a little glimpse at the theory of hybrids. We spot hybrids also across industries. So in the automobile sector, the hybrid solution would be like a Toyota Prius that has both an electrical engine and a gasoline-powered engine. The pure play disruption would be a car like the Peapod, which is not good enough to navigate mainstream Ohio highways, but it is capable of carting around teenagers who you don't want to be able to have accelerate too quickly or go too far without recharging. And it actually works really well for seniors who value it for the very reasons that it's not adequate for mainstream drivers. Another hybrid in the photography industry. The hybrid solution is to take your digital prints, take a snapshot right now of us at this conference together, and then go to Costco and print it out and display it on your wall on paper. The pure play solution is to take that digital shot and share it with your friends through Facebook or Instagram. Another hybrid that we've noticed in the banking industry, the hybrid solution is to pay your bills online and then still drive to your bank, your branch bank, and get out paper money and coins. The pure play solution is to do your payments electronically, completely, through your mobile device or through services like PayPal. There are even hybrid solutions in nature. One of my favorites is the liger. Part tiger, part lion. Yes, these do exist. I was going to show you a picture of a centaur, but I spared you. There are hybrids all over the place. It's fun to spot them. So we'll come back to this theory of hybrids later, but keep it in your mind because I think it has to do with blended learning. So now zooming to the present, how is disruption changing the way that the world learns? Traditionally, computers have been introduced on that back plane of competition instead of on the front disruptive plane. And what that means is that they've been used to enhance and improve the traditional architecture. In the past few decades, we've spent more than $60 billion on bringing technology into the classrooms. But if you think about it, it hasn't really changed the classroom very much. The same architecture continues to prevail in the classroom. And it's because those technologies have been introduced on that back playing field. But what we are finding is that online learning is emerging in a different way. It looks like it's a different phenomenon relative to the way that computers have come into the classroom in the past. It's coming across in a more disruptive way. One classic sign of a disruptive innovation is that it gets its start in areas of non-consumption. So the farmers that before had no way of digging the narrow ditches except for with a shovel, they found that that hydraulic truck actually was pretty good for them. We're finding that with online learning, it's getting its starts in areas where the alternative is nothing at all. Did you know that 40% of high schools in America do not offer one advanced placement course? And 25% of high schools in America do not offer any advanced courses beyond algebra and geometry, biology and chemistry, no honors English. There is rampant non-consumption that takes place even in our fully government-funded education system. Another classic sign of disruptive innovation is that it grows in an S-curve pattern. If you were to plot the adoption rate, it follows this interesting S-curve pattern, which is puzzling to me because it's actually a pattern that transcends industries. So the math is cool. And so it starts off with this early gradual prototyping, and then it hits an inflection point, that's tipping point, where it climbs up the S-curve. And if you linearize that S-curve using some logarithmic math, you can predict into the future for when the new technology will substitute for the old technology. And so this graph that you're seeing is that linearization of the S-curve, such that we can predict that by 2019, 50% of all high school courses will take place online. It's a quite staggering number, 50% of high school courses by 2019. So then the question that your friendly legislators asked me when I came and presented in Ohio was, this is coming, is this a good thing or not? And that's where I have to start defending. The interesting thing about disruptive innovations is that they bring to market a value proposition that before was not available to the mainstream market. So there are a few value propositions that we think are new that online learning introduces to the market that before were not available. The first is individualization. The traditional architecture of the classroom is prohibitively hard to customize. For one thing, it's interdependent. It's not modular. You can't plug and play different components to create your custom playlist. The interesting thing about online learning is that it's inherently modular, which allows for customization, the ability to plug and play different pieces and create your own experience. We've observed students doing Khan Academy who watch that lecture 20, 30 times because they just don't get it. That one, how do you do that quadratic equation? It's just not clicking. And they watch it enough times and they get it. And they move on, having firmly established some competency in that area. At the same time, there are students who get it fast in that area and can move forward and don't sit feeling as bored for as long in the classroom. So that opportunity to individualize, particularly as adaptive software becomes better and better, is important. Another thing that online learning brings to the market that before the disruptive enabler came to be was not available very easily is access and equity. We talked about the lack of access to advanced placement courses, the lack of access to great teachers. Public Impact has noticed that there are some teachers that they call 3X teachers, and that's because they are 3 times as effective in terms of moving the average student forward as their counterparts. And online learning has a unique capacity to extend the reach of these 3X teachers. The other interesting value proposition that online learning brings to the market that before was out of reach is the opportunity to do this in an efficient and in a more productive way. We all know in our hearts that the growth rate of education spending is probably not going to be what it has been in some of our more luxurious days as a country. And so, fortunately, we're finding that right at this moment of fiscal crisis, we're faced with a technology that can be some of the solution. Most disruptive innovations bring to market a much more affordable solution than was at our reach prior to their arrival. Students don't learn at constant rates. On the topic of individualization, this is a chart showing one of the students in 5th grade participating in a summer pilot with Khan Academy. And I want you to notice that blue line. Each of the nodes on that blue line represent the student's pace over time. This student started the summer program 3rd from the bottom. And by the end of the program, she was 3rd from the top, which makes me wonder if she hadn't had a chance to progress at her own pace, thanks to the more student-focused work that she was doing on Khan Academy, would she have had a chance to prove that she was one of those top students by the end of the summer? Or would she have always been relegated to the bottom tier? That's one of the interesting effects that we're seeing as online learning is moving into the classroom. Another pattern that's classic for a disruption is that it progresses over time. It steadily gets better and better. And true to form, we're finding that online learning does the same thing. So the communication devices are getting better and better. The broadband infrastructure is getting better and better. Skype and Illuminate and WebEx and these opportunities to communicate in virtual environments are getting better and better. The content is getting better and better. I love Florida Virtual School's module for US history. They call it Conspiracy Code. And this is an AP US history module that challenges students to save US history from corruption. So students form their own avatars and they're on a quest to save US history from corruption. We're seeing the advent of more and more game-like experiences to serve students for whom that is tremendously motivating. Another way that online learning seems to be improving, true to a classic disruptive innovation, is that it's starting to blend into brick and mortar settings. And in fact, that's how we define blended learning. It's whenever online learning, which includes some element of student control over time, place, path, and pace, migrates into brick and mortar classrooms. And it also includes a digital component, meaning that what the students are learning online and what they're learning face-to-face is integrated, so that there's some connection between what they're learning through their various modalities. Our research shows that over 90% of students will continue to need to learn in a brick-and-mortar setting, which makes sense. We don't want our kids to all be at home all day. We need to get them to a place where they're supervised. Most parents need custodial supervision for their children. A lot of children benefit from the hot lunches. There are a lot of reasons that brick-and-mortar schools will continue to be important into the future, we believe. In fact, more than 90% of students will continue to be educated in brick-and-mortar settings, but as we look into the future, we anticipate that more and more of those students will do so in blended environments. In 2012, we released a report called Classifying K-12 Blended Learning that introduces a preliminary taxonomy for blended learning. And basically, to read this chart, you look at online learning and brick-and-mortar learning, and imagine that those two get married and their baby is blended learning. And then blended learning has 4 babies. And those are the rotation model, the flex model, the self-blend model, and the enriched virtual model. And the rotation model, as a matter of fact, is becoming developed enough that we are starting to identify some pretty concrete submodels for that model. So this taxonomy continues to evolve. We anticipate that it will change over time. I hope it does, so that I keep my job. But it continues to evolve and change and improve over time. One note about blended learning is that it's not the same as technology-rich instruction. So just because a classroom has electronic whiteboards, just because it may even have one-to-one computing, does not necessarily mean that it's a blended learning classroom. Because you take away those devices, and the traditional architecture of the classroom remains the same. So a quick glance at the 4 models of blended learning that seem to typify the landscape. If you gaze out across the United States at what the schools are doing, what are we finding? What are the main patterns? The first is this rotation model. The rotation model is any time that students are rotating between online learning and other stations within their classroom. So they might be doing online learning for 25 minutes, and then face-to-face small group instruction for 25 minutes, and then some activity at their desk for 25 minutes. They rotate on a fixed schedule or at the teacher's discretion. There are classroom-based models like the station rotation. The lab rotation is where the students rotate into a lab for that kind of a rotation model. The flipped classroom is where they're doing this kind of a rotation, but it's between their home and the school. So they're doing the online learning at home, often watching their teachers lecture or learning materials at home, and then coming to the classroom for supplementation and application. And then the individual rotation, which is where students are still rotating on a fixed schedule, but each student has a custom playlist. So the individual rotation model is a little bit unique relative to the others because the students are rotating on an individualized or customized playlist through the different modalities. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. First, an example of the station rotation model. It's one of the most common models of blended learning that we're seeing start to move into classrooms today. KIPP Empower is based in South Central Los Angeles. And when Mike Kerr, who runs KIPP Empower, was faced with budget cuts across the state of California, he had a problem. He wanted to preserve the integrity of the KIPP model, but he was worried that increasing the student-teacher ratio from 20 to 28 students per teacher would damage the integrity of the KIPP model. And so he thought, we need to innovate. We need to do something different from how traditionally we have implemented KIPP at our school. And so what Mike Kerr did was he leveraged blended learning. And he set up a station rotation model where students rotate between online learning and face-to-face instruction at fixed intervals. So some students are going to be in part of the classroom learning online, and other students are doing small group face-to-face instruction with a lead teacher or with an intervention specialist. Because it's blended learning, all of the brick-and-mortar scaffolding stays in place. So students continue to have PE. They continue to have their hot lunches. Another example of a rotation model is an individual rotation model. Carpe Diem in Yuma, Arizona began also because they had a problem to solve. They were losing their facility, and they didn't have enough budget to continue to be able to serve their students. And so Rick Ogston said, we need a new way of doing this. Our old pattern, the traditional architecture, is no longer working for our students or our circumstances. And so what they did was they bought a new they leased a new building, and in the center of that building, it almost looks like a call center. I've walked into this building and you feel like you're almost in a call center. In the center are workstations, and the students engage in E2020 content for their core learning and instruction. And then around the periphery of the building are classrooms. And in these classrooms are face-to-face teachers that pull the students out at fixed intervals for instruction, for application, for lab work, and for some enrichment that involves the hands-on stuff. So here's some examples. This is the lab where the students engage in their online content. They also use Acuity to check the results that E2020 is producing to make sure that to have a second assessment system layered on, which I think is a smart idea. The teachers that roam the learning lab offer as-needed support. There's actually a bar that goes across the screen, and it moves from green to yellow to red, high alert. And that means teachers come in and help because the student's not making progress anymore. And then there's teachers in the classrooms on the side that offer instruction and application and assistance. And these are master teachers who can serve all 273 of the students in a face-to-face way to support and enrich and make real the things that they're learning online. There's also a personal trainer who helps the students with their physical fitness. The second main model of blended learning that's emerging is the flex model. And it's similar to the rotation model in that students are rotating among modalities, but they do so on a fluid schedule. The three hallmarks of a flex model are that the students are primarily accessing the content and instruction over the internet. The teachers of record are on site, offering face-to-face support, and the schedule is flexible. So here's a diagram that's classic of a flex model. This is a diagram of the Flex Academy based in San Francisco. But an idea of students learning online, possibly in a learning lab, and then breakout rooms across the perimeter where face-to-face teachers offer as-needed support just in time. One of my favorite flex schools is in Austin, Texas, where I'm from. And they serve 1st through 5th graders. These students are all combined. There are no grade levels. And the students start their week by setting some goals. So they would say, by the end of this week, I want to have made this much progress in math, this much progress in reading, and this much progress in spelling. And then they meet with their teacher and they lock in those goals. And then throughout the week, during core instruction time, the areas you see there in yellow, the students engage in the material in their own way. They have a chance to move through the curriculum at their own pace, and they actually have a chance to choose from a menu of options for which content provider they're going to use to engage with that material, or they can do it offline if they prefer to read, say, a paper book. And then at the end of the week, there's the accountability. So the student ownership just skyrockets through this model. 2 of my own children actually attend the Acton Academy. How could I resist? After doing all this research, it was so hard to put my kids in a school that didn't allow for some of this individualization. So we moved our family from Honolulu 2 years ago to Austin, Texas, because I was so enamored with this school. So my husband has a love-hate relationship with this school because I made him do this. But this is my daughter, Savannah, and she just took such a love to the online content for math. She especially loves Dreambox Learning for whatever reason. I think she likes the mermaids and the fairies and the opportunity to win little coins as you steal them from pirates as you work through your math. And so she just loved it, and it really resonated with her. This little blonde daughter of mine is now 3 years ahead of herself with math. Who would have ever thought that she would be that way? I had no idea. And I just wonder if she hadn't been in that environment, if she would have had that chance to find that she just loves math. Anyway, one day we were at IKEA, and I was interested to note that she marched right up to one of those physical abacuses, and abaci, I don't know, and she said, look, if you move 30 plus 20, you get 50, Mom. Or if you have 100 here and you take 10 away, you have 90. And she showed me how this abacus works. And she'd never seen one before. And it was so striking to me that she was able to take the virtual abacus experience that she had had on Dreambox Learning and apply it in a physical setting with no coaching from me. It was one of the ways that I would hope that that virtual would translate to the physical. The fourth model of blended learning that we're seeing really take root is the self-blend model. And this is any time that students take a fully online course to supplement the learning that they're doing in the brick and mortar setting. So suppose that your school doesn't offer Arabic, suppose it doesn't offer Chinese, suppose that a student really wants to learn algebra online because that just works better for him. This self-blend model is when students are given the opportunity to take a course online as opposed to just in a traditional classroom setting. This is the biggest category of online learning because millions of students are self-blending right now with or without the support of their districts. And then the fourth model is the enriched virtual model. What we're seeing is that full-time virtual schools originally served predominantly homeschoolers, students who had a lot of face-to-face support from their parents. But that as full-time virtual schools have extended their reach, they're starting to bring into their market more students who need remediation. And it's starting to be a problem because those students are not thriving in a full-time virtual setting to the extent that their predecessors were, the students that had the family support. And so full-time virtual schools are starting to say, we better create some brick and mortar scaffolding to make this work for those students. And so it's one of the ways that we're seeing blended learning improve over time and serve a broader, more demanding audience is by creating these full-time enriched virtual schools where students can come in and have some face-to-face scaffolding to support what they're learning online. So there's an overview of the models of blended learning that seem to be pervading the system. So now we'll look into the future. Can we peek into the future and anticipate what's ahead? On the short term, I have 4 predictions for you for this year alone. The first is that we'll see a lot more rotation models, particularly at the elementary school level, where the concept of station rotation or moving through centers is not particularly new or revolutionary. So it makes for a relatively easy transition into a rotation model with blended learning, where you slot in some online learning for one of those centers. The second prediction is a growth in flex models at the district level. And that's because flex models oftentimes require quite a reconfiguration of facilities and scheduling and operations and staffing roles. And increasingly, we're finding that districts think, I better at least pilot or prototype one of those so I'm not caught unprepared in 10 years when a lot of my other districts in the area know how to do this and we don't have a clue. So we're finding that more and more districts and charter school networks are wanting to experiment with at least one flex prototype or pilot. The third trend is the growth in the self-blend model, particularly at the high school level. I know that in a couple days you'll have the chance to hear from some of the pioneers of these massive open online courses, the MOOC movement. And we think that that growth in the opportunity to take physics from, say, a professor at MIT will drive interest at the high school level for taking courses online. So expect to see growth in supplemental, full end-to-end online courses at the high school level this year. And then finally, for reasons that I already explained, the growth in the full-time virtual schools. As more and more students say that they're interested in attending a full-time virtual environment, then we think that more of those full-time virtual schools will create brick and mortar experiences for those students to support those who need that kind of scaffolding. So then looking forward farther out into the future, I want to return for a moment to that story of the hybrids. As you'll recall, the hybrid solution of the hydro-hoe eventually faded into the distance as the pure play disruption came to the front. Last week, I was actually telling some people about this story, and a gentleman came up to me at the end and he said, my father used to be the CEO of Bucyrus Erie, the firm that pioneered this hydro-hoe. And I recall distinctly when he came home from work and said that he had told his employees they better figure out what they want to be when they grow up, because no longer was their job going to be the same in the future. As we look at hybrid, we're finding that the hybrid pattern is starting to reflect in blended learning as well. that some models of blended learning are appearing in a more sustaining fashion relative to the traditional classroom, and some are appearing more in a disruptive fashion. When hybrid solutions arise, they appear as sustaining relative to the traditional system. So the Toyota Prius sustains the traditional highway system. The Hydra hoe was sustaining relative to the traditional excavating industry. In like fashion, a hybrid blended learning model is one that is sustaining relative to the traditional classroom. There are a few ways to spot a hybrid model developing. The first is a hybrid technology has both the old and the new. So it has both the traditional classroom architecture plus an online component. If the model has that, it's probably a hybrid model. The second is that it's competing according to the traditional value propositions. It's trying to bring that long reach and the big scoops to market as opposed to looking for a new market. The hybrid solutions try to serve students in the more traditional way. Third, they serve core customers. They tend to not get their start among non-consumption, but they begin in areas of core customers with core classrooms. And then fourth, they require expertise in both. So typically, those who are running a hybrid model need to be good at both the traditional classroom plus the new age online classroom. Those are ways to spot a hybrid. Looking back at the taxonomy, and this is how you know this research hasn't even been published yet that I'm trying to share with you right now. What we're noticing is that there's a hybrid zone of blended learning, wherein some of the models appear to be coming onto the scene in a sustaining way, in a way that will improve and enhance the traditional classroom architecture. Some of the station rotation, lab rotation, and flipped classroom models appear to be entering the market as hybrids, whereas the individual rotation, flex, self-blend, and enriched virtual appear to be entering the market as pure play disruptive solutions. So what are the implications for that? We all find ourselves at the beginning of this path thinking about the road ahead. And one implication is that for many people, the path ahead is a sustaining one. Sustaining innovations are not inferior to disruptive innovations. So often when people read this literature about disruption and sustaining, they think disruption is good and sustaining is bad. And that's not necessarily the case. The sustaining solution can bring much needed enhancement to the traditional classroom architecture. So for many people in this room, the sustaining pathway is the best. And the reason why is that it takes a great amount of power and influence to bring about a disruption. And it takes an ability to oftentimes tear down your classroom walls, reconfigure operations, and do things in a way that really haven't been done in the past. So for many people, that pathway is out of reach, and your best way to move forward as an innovator is along this sustaining trajectory by bringing one of the new blended learning models to the classroom in a way that will improve and enhance that traditional classroom. For others who are at a senior position, who have the potential to do something disruptive, or who want to start outside the system by serving non-consumers, there's a disruptive path ahead for you. And the value of that disruptive path is that it can bring some of those value propositions to market, like individualization, like productivity, like access and equity, in a way that is more true to pattern of a disruption. And so for people that have the organizational status and the power to bring around a disruption, this is within your realm of possibilities. I want to tell you for a minute about a fast food restaurant and change gears for a minute and tell you about a fast food restaurant that wanted to think about how to serve its customers better. So they brought in some consultants and they said, you know, we really want to improve our milkshake business. And what we're finding is that our milkshake sales have been stagnant for a long time. They've just been flat. How can we goose up our milkshake business? And so they had these consultants think about it. And these consultants camped out at the fast food store for a few days. And they came across a startling truth. And that was that 50% of the people who were coming in to buy a milkshake were doing so in the early morning. They were coming in like 7:30 in the morning, grabbing their milkshake and leaving. And these consultants scratched their head and they thought, who is drinking a milkshake at 7:30 in the morning? So they started going up to these consumers and saying, why are you buying this milkshake right now? What is the job that you're trying to do? And they said, job that we're trying to do? What does that mean? And they said, well, last time that you hired a milkshake, or you chose to not hire a milkshake, what did you hire instead? And these consumers thought, well, I guess I hired a coffee one time, but it was gone by 7:30 and I was still hungry. I guess I hired a banana one time, but then I left that banana peel in my car and it was smelly by the end of the day. I guess I hired a donut one time, but it was sticky and the sprinkles got all over the place. And I was also kind of hungry again after a couple of hours. One time I hired a Snickers bar, but I felt so guilty I'll never do that again. One time I hired a bagel, but it was dry and tasteless and it crumbed all over the place. And then you put jam on it or cream cheese and then it's just a big mess. But that milkshake, because it turns out with a milkshake, someone gave me one hand and that's on the steering wheel, but someone gave me another hand. And it's just perfect for holding that milkshake. And if I navigate that milkshake really carefully, it can take me a good 20 minutes to drink that milkshake, and it makes my morning commute so much better. And so the job that those early morning commuters were doing with that milkshake was to fill themselves up and to entertain themselves on the route. Once the marketers figured that out, they were able to build such a better milkshake. For one thing, they put stir-ins in, little chunks that every now and then would come up through that straw and just delight an unexpected consumer and entertain them a little bit better for those 20 minutes. They took that milkshake maker and they moved it to the front counter so that the people who were busily trying to get to work could run into the store, grab their milkshake, and take off. They thought about putting it into convenience stores because now, knowing what these people were trying to do, it was so much easier to think of a way to serve them better by bringing that milkshake maker into a convenience store where they could quickly grab it as they got onto their freeway on-ramp. They learned how to nail the job for their consumers. Why is it that schools are failing right now? One reason is that they do not always nail the job that students are trying to do. Believe it or not, the majority of students do not come to school for the job. They do not hire schools for the job of being educated. They come for other reasons. The main reason students come to school is to feel successful and to have fun with friends. How well are we doing at helping them nail that job? Miserably in some cases. In some ways, the ways that they feel the most successful and have fun with friends, and I had to think about this as we watched this darling band this morning, is through their extracurriculars, which says a lot. Those are not mainstream pieces of their curriculum. They're extracurriculars. By design, a portion of our students will fail the class. Not every student will get the A+ every time. So how would we redesign schools if we were to think of nailing the job for students? One way is by personalizing it so that they each can feel successful in increments of time. Another way is by allowing them to have access to the best teachers and the best online content. And the third way would be by making it affordable so that this type of experience could be extended throughout the reach of schools. And that's why the disruptive path is interesting to me, because it brings a value proposition to the table that was before unavailable that could potentially allow us to nail it for students. So then what is the future for students? Acton Academy in Austin, Texas was founded by some entrepreneurs named Jeff and Laura Sandifer. And their story goes like this. They had a student, a daughter, who was in a very fancy private school where she learned through the best traditional instruction. They had two sons who were in a Montessori-based preschool where they learned through self-directed learning. And Jeff Sandifer said, when is the right time to take my sons out of this Montessori experience and put them in this high-end traditional private school? And the private school teacher said, as fast as possible. Because as soon as your sons become too accustomed to the self-directed learning that they get to experience in their preschool and in their early elementary school, they will be unhappy, miserable creatures in our school. Better to not expose them to that for too long. And Jeff said, that is not going to work for me. And that's why he decided to start an elementary school, one that allows their students to self-pace. And one of the founding narratives of this elementary school as the students join Acton Academy is that they're on a hero's journey, that they have a unique role that they're going to play in this life, and that they're on a journey to fulfill it. I've found that throughout my life, I've had and in being able to speak to educators. When I was a senior in high school, I was the student member on the State Board of Education in California. California elects one student who's 17 to travel to Sacramento and live up there about half of your time in high school and be a full voting member of the State Board of Education. So at a young age, I was exposed to education on a statewide level. And I find that in my life, I continue to have opportunities to think about, research, and talk about how to improve schools, in addition to caring for my own children who are on their own journey. That's my hero's journey right now. And I believe that everyone who's in this room today is here for a reason, that you also are on a hero's journey, that you also are here because you are educators who care about children, that you are also here because you are educators who know something about technology. And everybody who leaves this conference will know something about technology that a lot of your counterparts do not know. You will know something about some of the sustaining and disruptive innovations that are changing our system. And because of that knowledge, you are no longer free. You are now responsible. I always teach my children that with responsibility comes privilege. And with your responsibility becomes the privilege of helping to transform our classrooms, and I know you can do it. I know that you're here today because you know something about technology. You know something about the 21st century classrooms that will be in the future. And you know something about how technology allows classrooms to do something that was previously unavailable. And so I know that you're here today because you can leave this room and bring that knowledge back and bring value propositions to your students that will nail the job for them in a way that previously was not possible. And I know that you're here today because you're on your own hero's journey that can bring that kind of experience to your students. So I wish you the best, and I hope that you'll nail it for your students. Thank you.